Welcome to Irish Passport.
Let's do it.
Welcome to the Irish Passport.
I'm Tim McInerney.
I'm Naomi O'Leary.
We're friends.
Okay, well to Naomi.
Anwar Fad Tim. This is your passport to Irish culture, history and politics. I'm recording.
One,
two,
three. Okay.
Hello and welcome back to the Irish Passport, where today we are talking about probably one of the things that comes into people's minds first when they think about Ireland. Naomi, we are talking, of course, about the black stuff, a pint of plain, the famous Guinness.
Guinness, yeah, in the news at the moment, or I guess on people's radar because the new series, which we might come to in a bonus episode. But we thought we would lay out a little bit of the history of Guinness and discuss this curious part of Irish culture because it's so embedded, the image, the symbol of Guinness with the international conception of Irishness. But yet, you know, it's a private interest. It's owned by Diageo. It's a company. So we thought we'd discuss it, the cultural meaning of it, and a little bit about the real history behind that brand.
Yes, indeed. And you mentioned the series there, Naomi. We're talking about a recent Netflix series that came out called House of Guinness. And we'll be talking about this a little bit later, but I think this is relevant to exactly that because Guinness is always in the news somehow. Something to really note about Guinness is its marketing. It's a marketing genius, and it's somehow always seems to be on people's radars in a new way, in some way or another. And one part of that marketing is marketing itself as a kind of element of Irishness. And Ireland has used Guinness and vice versa in a kind of symbiosis in order to market each other, which is really, really interesting.
That's right. Even down to the harp symbol on Guinness, which is traditionally a symbol of Ireland, and it would have been on our early versions of our flag. Although what Guinness has done is basically taken that harp and switched it around, so it's a mirror image of what was the national symbol, which is kind of fascinating.
Naomi, I actually looked this up earlier.
Okay.
And it's even more interesting than that. So this is something that a lot of Irish people know, that the harp on the national symbol of Ireland is the same harp as on the pint of Guinness, but they're facing different ways. Turns out, well, the harp has been a symbol of Ireland since like the early Middle Ages, by the way. You know, it's you also still see it on the British coat of arms. It's still there, you know, representing Ireland, of course, and they never took it out. But it's a different harp. If you look at the British coat of arms, or if you look at harps that represented Ireland from before independence, it's a different kind of harp. It's just a kind of like any old harp, basically, that they throw together. They don't really mind which harp they're putting up there. But Guinness in the 19th century adopted the harp of Brian Boru, which you know and I know, Naomi, because this is a harp that is in our old university in Trinity College, and which a lot of people who have visited Ireland will have seen as well in the famous long room of Trinity College. This is
so it's like a particular famous harp rather than a generic harp image. Yeah.
It's a particular famous harp. Yes, it's from the 14th century. It was rumoured to belong to Brian Boru. I don't think it did. Guinness took this on. And then when Ireland became independent, the Free State said, yeah, we want to use Brian Boru's harp as well. It is the oldest harp in Ireland. It's the most famous harp in Ireland.
Wow.
And Guinness said, no, you can't. So it was the Irish state that had to turn it around and not Guinness. So Guinness had it first.
That's gas.
Anyway, right. So I think maybe a good place to start here actually is I think we should start in Dublin, actually, just to think about Guinness as a presence in Dublin, because if we kind of like step away from the drink itself, just the presence of the industry in Dublin is really overwhelming. Naomi, you're a born and bred Dubliner. Can you tell us about what Guinness means to Dubliners?
So you might see the presence of Guinness, first of all, with the trundling trucks that come down the street full of barrels, and they will have Guinness branding on them often. And in the morning, quite noisily, those big silver steel barrels will be rolled off the trucks, and many of the pubs have sort of hatches in the pavements, and the silver barrels get rolled down there, and there's the pubs like restocking after the weekend, let's say on a Monday, and those trucks are quite noisy. They go clattering around with, their steel barrels in them. So you'll notice that. You'll notice Guinness branding everywhere, because you'll often see it outside pubs. It's like the one thing the pubs absolutely have to have on tap, pretty much. Like, you can't not have it, really. You'll notice that a little way up the river from the dead centre of the city is St. James Gate, which is where the Guinness factory is. It's a kind of iconic gate that looks like a pint of Guinness, because the top of it is white and the bottom of it is black, or most of it is black, and it has Guinness written on it. And during the brewing process, a smell of hops gets released that often sort of drifts down the river, and you can catch a smell of it. So it's quite present. It's obviously, a significant major employer, and more so now, because if you look at any sort of visitor's guide to Dublin, or top things to do in Dublin, right up there now, there will be a visit to the Guinness factory, because it's developed itself over the last couple of decades as a tourist destination. So you can visit the factory, and you can go up to this bar, which is really high up, and see this view overall of the city, and they'll pour a pint of Guinness for you there, and you'll get, the full-on sort of brand marketing persuasion targeted at you, trying to, tell you about how delicious and essential a pint of Guinness is. And, they'll pour it for you exactly the right way and tell you about the perfect pour and all that kind of thing. And it's enormously popular. It's one of the most popular things to visit for tourists in Dublin.
Yeah, it's true. And actually, I think this maybe doesn't come to our minds as much as it should, because when we think of Guinness in Dublin, we think of exactly what you're saying, Naomi, kind of walking through, let's say, the Liberties, or walking through Dublin 8, or anywhere to the southwest of Dublin. You get this waft on the breeze of the hops brewing sometimes whenever you come within, I don't know, like half a kilometre of the Guinness brewery. And that would be how we would think about its presence there. But I mean, a lot of visitors to Dublin would think about it through that visitor centre of the Guinness Storehouse, which is huge. It's hugely popular. It's one of the most popular attractions in Europe, if not the world, I think. It's got 20 million visitors have been there. Like, it outstrips pretty much everything else in Ireland in terms of attractions. And it's an ad. Like, the whole thing is an ad. Like, that. You just step into an ad. Because I remember being in Dublin in university, and I would have people who visited me from abroad, and they really wanted to go. They already knew about what this place was. I mean, it was quite new back then. But they were excited to go to this Guinness Storehouse. And I hardly even knew it existed. But, I ended up going, I think, twice. And the second time I said to myself, never again. Like, what am I doing? This is ridiculous. I'm paying, 15, 20 euros to be advertised to for an hour and a half. Like, it was, it is just one big publicity. I mean, listen, it's kind of interesting because you get to go into the area where the brewery is, but otherwise you step into quite a modern building and you just get advertised to for an hour and a half. They give you a pint of Guinness at the top, and then you leave. And the thing that really struck me was, before you leave, you had to back then anyway, you had to pass through a corridor, a fairly long corridor with just the word Guinness, 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 Guinness that was flashing at you in lights. And I thought, Jesus, this is a bit aggressive, But what a triumph of marketing that is, to manage to make their ad into one of the most attractive tourist attractions in the city.
I have to confess, I've never actually been.
Well, you're not missing out much. Sorry,
but
Guinness,
exactly, that's why I wouldn't go, because it seems like I'm okay. Like, I know about Guinness already. It's part of the general brewery tourism thing, which has become more and more popular. So you can visit loads of breweries now, or distilleries as well for whiskey. It's something that people can do, which, to be honest, a lot of visitors come to Ireland and look for things to do, and can be a little bit of a question mark about what. So they're filling a gap in the market.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're definitely catering to people who are coming to Dublin for a weekend of fun. So if you have, let's say, stag parties, or it doesn't have to be stag parties, but just people who are coming, let's say, from the UK for a weekend to Dublin, and they don't want to go to museums, they don't want to go to art galleries, they don't want to go to anywhere quiet, they want to have a bit of fun. This is kind of perfect for the typical Dublin fun weekend, where it's, you can jump around, you can have a pint of Guinness at the top of the tower, it's very relaxed, and they're tapping into that very well as well.
And of course, that must be why Queen Elizabeth visited when she was on her state visit, because she wanted to let her hair down, I'm sure.
Absolutely. I mean, well, this is another thing. Like, the diplomacy symbolism of Guinness is absolutely huge.
Yeah.
So every head of state who passes through is always going to be photographed having a pint of Guinness, including Britain's Queen Elizabeth and Barack Obama and Joe Biden. I mean, everyone, basically.
It's bizarre. She was shown around that place by Ryan Tubridy, like a prominent television presenter. Do you remember?
No, I don't remember, no.
Yeah, so this is like when they came up with this like itinerary where it's like, okay, this is this momentous, state visit of the Queen. First time they've come since independence, like it's like a huge deal. Yeah. Okay, we're going to bring them to the Guinness brewery and she's going to be shown around by Ryan Tubridy. And like have like, see the 2-part pour and everything. God. But it's this huge thing. It was the same when Barack Obama came. Like he went to Moneygall, where he has ancestral connections, and he went to the pub and they, stood him a pint of Guinness. And it's something that I noticed really interesting is that the US presidents that visit Ireland, they get given a pint of Guinness, right? And normally they never allow themselves to be photographed with alcohol because that image is always used for attack ads against them. So whenever they come to the Irish state visit and they get like a happy picture of them with a glass of Guinness, a pint of Guinness, that always ends up in Republican attack ads because if they're Democrats anyway. Yeah, because it's like, it'll be like Barack Obama, the wastrel who, spends money and is just joking around in office, and then it'll show him with his beer. It's just like it's like it becomes fodder for negativity. They usually don't allow themselves to get pictured like this, but this is the one exception, and it always gets used in that way. Yeah,
that's so interesting. So they are actually, there is a sacrifice, a publicity sacrifice that they're making in order to make these, I suppose, bigger gains by being photographed with a pint of Guinness. But I mean that photograph of, for instance, Obama with a pint of Guinness in Moneygall is iconic. It's kind of iconic now.
Yeah,
you see it like every now and again comes up. It's not something that goes away. Like that is a moment just that the pint of Guinness actually cemented in time. If that was the same photo of him in a pub in Ireland without the pint of Guinness, would never have seen it. Anyway,
it's something like if you think about the stuff that works on Instagram, it's always something that you kind of do. Right? Like you can get tips for how to take a picture that like runs well on social media. And it's usually something that's sort of interactive and very visual. And I think that's literally all it is. It's just, it works and it communicates the visit to Ireland and having a good time.
Yeah.
So yes, it's very, very successful branding, as you say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose a lot of this, I mean, listen, we're going to get back into the marketing a little bit later. But a lot of this might be down to the simple graphic design of the pint itself. It's just a very simple and identifiable shape,
That's right.
90% black and 10% white at the top.
And the shape of the pint glass itself, which is very carefully constructed. And it becomes like it becomes a shorthand, a symbolic shorthand for drinks in general as well, just that pint glass shape.
It does, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. And of course, that iconic shape of the glass is also so closely identified with the pub, the image of the Irish pub. So anyone who has been into an Irish pub anywhere in Ireland will be used to opening the door and seeing maybe 7 or 8 people sitting down, and every single one of them has a pint of Guinness in front of them. Yeah. And if you go on maybe a match day or something like a GAA day, you might have the pub completely packed, and every single one of those people, more or less, is going to have a pint of Guinness in front of them. Just Guinness kind of overflowing absolutely everywhere. Like the centrality of this image of the pint of Guinness with the Irish pub is inseparable, really.
Yeah, and internationally as well. It's part of the model, which we've covered in a previous episode about the format of the Irish pub is partly bound up with this and Guinness memorabilia, and it becomes this stand-in for Ireland in general and a kind of outpost, which is advertising Ireland completely tied up with Guinness as an idea.
Right. So we are going to get into this a little bit more because this position of Guinness in Irish society is complicated. And obviously there's a lot to dig into here. But before we go any further, we need to kind of cover a little bit of the history of this, because this is something that we've been asked to do, actually, by quite a lot of listeners who wrote in with this series coming out, The House of Guinness. asking us, what is this series real? Is it not? Is it true? What's going on? The series is quite dramatized version of the Guinness family. But the family itself is actually kind of interesting. Most of what's in the series, spoiler alert, is just not true. It's just made up. I'm just going to say that straight out.
Okay.
But what's actually going on in the Guinness family is more interesting, I think, almost because of what wasn't included in the series.
Huh.
So
amazing.
Let's get into it.
So let's start out. Guinness, unusual name. Where does that come from?
Yeah. Yes, it is an unusual name. And I would say, Naomi, that you probably don't know many Guinnesses.
No? Well, actually,
no.
I do actually have a... Yes. I do have a neighbour, a Guinness neighbour. And, I mean, she would be in some way related to those Guinnesses, but it's like another strand of the Guinnesses. But yeah, they're like a fairly well-to-do family. And yeah, I do know one, yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, outside the people who are actually connected to that family, you probably don't know very many.
Probably not. It's not like a really common surname, no.
No, it's not a common surname that you come across a lot. But there is a common surname, which is McGuinness. You meet McGuinnesses all the time. McGuinnesses are up and down the country.
Of course. Yeah, that's right.
Yes, indeed. Right. And there was a time, mostly in the 19th century, when the Guinness family, the Guinness brewing family, used to say that they came originally from this McGuinness family. They said they came from the Gaelic Mochangasa clan, so son of Angus clan. And the Mochangasa clan was anglicised to McGuinness. And the Mochangasa, yes, they were quite powerful. They ruled a territory in pre-colonial Ireland called Ivachach, which is around modern-day County Down, and that was anglicised to Ivy in English. Of course, a name that is very closely associated with the Guinness. Not Ivy like the plant. Iveagh is how it's written down, but pronounced Ivy.
Yes.
And yes, I wonder was it pronounced Ivach originally?
That's
because
possible.
of the way it's anglicised from Ivachach, but whatever. Anyway, today most people will say Ivy. And when the Guinnesses got a noble title, which was really late in the 1890s, they chose the title Baron Ivy, not because they had anything to do with this territorial place, but because they wanted to create a link with the McGuinnesses, with this McGuinness clan. They were trying to hint at descent from this ancient clan, which for them was quite strategic at that point. Yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting. So it's one of those like retrospective histories that's written onto the family tree to justify, like in ancient times, their nobility. Like, like in the old days where people would claim descent from some god or old king or whatever.
Yeah, it's an interesting analogy, but yeah, basically that's exactly what they're doing. Yeah. And now that's a story that was told quite a lot, but there doesn't seem to be any evidence actually linking those Guinnesses to the ancient McGuinnesses, despite the fact that their names sound so similar. It's possible actually that the surname Guinness actually comes from a little townland in County Down also called Guinness, which was also anglicised to Guinness. This happens all the time with the anglicizations in Ireland when British soldiers were hanging around anglicising things. They often use the same English sounding word to translate loads of stuff that were actually very different. So Guinness and Mochaingus got translated in the same way as Guinness.
Right.
And there's actually a little road called Guinness Road, Naomi, where we have been. There, where Guinness used to be, we have been to Guinness Road. Yes.
Oh, I didn't realise that.
Yes, we did. When we were in County Down for a live show some years ago, we got lost. We were looking for a B&B. And we got lost in the rolling hills of South County Down. And we realised that we were on a road called Guinness Road for ages. We just got completely lost down there.
Okay, that's fascinating, and I completely forgot. Thank you for the reminder.
Yeah, I was only reminded when I looked this up. Where on earth is Guinness? I was like, oh yeah, I remember that. Anyway, so the actual Guinness family, the first recorded person in the Guinness family that we know today is quite late. We don't know about him until 1690. This is Richard Guinness. He was the dad of Arthur Guinness, the famous brewer. And the family lived in Selbridge, County Kildare, which is about 20 kilometres from Dublin. Mm-hmm. So Arthur Guinness's dad, Richard, he worked as a registrar for an Anglican vicar in Selbridge. Mm-hmm. So that basically means that he was a kind of office clerk. He was a record keeper for the church in the district. So we're talking about a kind of middle-income family, nothing fancy, but quite respectable and educated. You know, they can read, they can count, they keep ledgers, things like that.
Right. And this is telling us as well that the Guinnesses were a Protestant family, right? And that would have been important in this period of history.
Yeah, most important. Like this is the period in history probably where it was the most important, because we're at the beginning of the 18th century here, and listeners to our recent Conquest series will know that that means we're about 50 years after Ireland was scorched and starved and demilitarized by the Cromwellian invasion and kind of set up as this colonial arena.
Okay, so just to hammer home what that means then, at the end of this invasion, Ireland's population had been reduced by about 25%, according to conservative estimates. Practically all Catholic land had been seized and handed over to colonial speculators, and Westminster had imposed a set of crushing sectarian laws which denied the Catholic majority basic civil rights like political representation, access to education, and inheritance rights. So, I guess just by virtue of being born a Protestant in this era, someone like Arthur Guinness would have had immensely privileged access to political, legal, and civil authority because they're in this really privileged minority.
Yeah, exactly. So let's take a look at this Protestant sector of the populace for a moment, because it's an important element of this family's success story. So by the 18th century, while Arthur Guinness was alive, Protestants represented about 20 to 25% of the population of Ireland. So, quite a big chunk, a big minority. Now, about 10% of these, however, were Presbyterians or other nonconformists, which meant that they also had diminished civil rights under the penal laws. Now, their diminished rights weren't anywhere near as oppressive as the laws against Catholics, but Presbyterians couldn't stand for office, for instance, right? So they were kind of kept out of official society as well.
Right.
So that left about 12 to 15% of the population who were Anglicans, which means that they were high church Protestants, right? And this group pretty much ran the country. So from that point of view, it's actually a very small minority. Like it's within that 12 to 15%, we have to realize that only a tiny fraction were members of the elite. So we talk all the time in this podcast about the Protestant ascendancy, the colonial elite, the Anglo-Irish elite, whatever. They were about 800 families from that 10 to 15% of the population. So there were a lot of other Protestants living in Ireland as well, like quite a big population. The rest of this Anglican population, they were mostly kind of middling rank business people, shopkeepers, artisans in the towns and cities. And then a lot of them were actually farmers as well, but generally quite well-to-do farmers.
Okay, so that helps us to situate the Guinnesses, right? They're not part of that top elite, but they're part of this sort of exclusive ethno-religious caste, I guess, in Irish society, which gave them really unrivaled access to seats of power.
Yeah. So if you were an Anglican Protestant in 18th century Ireland, the entire social system was built for you. And the country kind of was described as you, basically. I think one of the famous examples of this is a letter from Jonathan Swift to the nation of Ireland, or to the Irish nation. And when Jonathan Swift is a famous writer from the 18th century, when he was speaking to the Irish nation or the nation of Ireland, he just meant Anglicans. He didn't mean Presbyterians or Catholics. So he was speaking to 10 to 15% of the population who described themselves quite commonly as the Irish nation. That's how much kind of power this tiny group of people had. So, whether or not you were in this elite within that minority, taxes are designed to make your life easier. Property law is designed for you to get more property. Opportunity that you have for advancement in life is just immense. The entire colonial government is composed of Anglicans like you. Everyone working in the legal system were Anglicans like you. All education was Anglican run. And as an Anglican, you have special inheritance rights that are literally designed just for you to get richer by absorbing land from Catholics. All of this opportunity is reserved for 12 to 15% of the population. So you are in this kind of ethno-religious elite, I suppose, in a way.
Right. We can see that you have this set of advantages. So what's your excuse for not succeeding, really? If you're an Anglican at this point in history, you're a real loser if you don't manage to get ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, I was sure. Listen, a lot of Anglicans struggled at this point. Like, I'm not trying to say that, like, all of them have a silver spoon in their mouth. That was not true by any means. But we have to keep this kind of leg up in mind when we think about Arthur Guinness's, quote unquote, extraordinary rise to become a business tycoon.
Yeah.
Because, there is this narrative around the history of the Guinness family. And there's been a lot written about the Guinnesses, and people don't seem to look very much into this. They just see a kind of a humble brewer rising to become the most powerful businessman in Ireland. That's the way they see it. But this isn't, this isn't what we're looking at here. In fact, the phenomenon of middle-income Anglicans becoming like really powerful business people just by virtue of their religion was a problem in 18th century Ireland. Like, people were unhappy about it. Because
it was a recognised phenomenon, like.
Absolutely. It was happening all the time, and it made people nervous because what was happening was these kind of humble business people were becoming richer than the gentry and the nobility in the colonial system. So in 1729, for instance, the richest man in Ireland was William Connolly. He built, I think it is a Castletown house. He also came from Selbridge. He built loads of beautiful things, lots of follies and stuff around Ireland that you would still see today. He was the son of an innkeeper, and his first language was actually Irish. He had converted to Protestantism. So really, once you got into this club of Anglicans, anyone could kind of do anything, which was not the way society was supposed to be set up. This was not the idea.
Right. In the way that the society was supposed to work, that wasn't supposed to happen. But because the whole economic system in Ireland was sort of skewed by these penal laws that were kind of repressing the large majority of the population, and I suppose at the same time then giving the minority relatively huge rights or huge advantages, you create this situation where members of that minority can suddenly leapfrog over those people, the elites who are supposed to be the most privileged in society.
Absolutely. That's exactly what's going on. And we have to keep this in mind if we think back to where we are in history. The British have just introduced a kind of British system wholesale into Ireland. They're trying to create a social system just like the British social system, where you have nobles at the top, and going down to gentry and middling people much, much further down the line. And that's all getting perverted here, basically. It's just not working.
Okay.
Yes, so Arthur Guinness ends up getting into the brewing industry, and surprise,
this is the son of the clerk. The son of the clerk and just gets into brewing. He starts somehow.
He gets into brewing. The dad, I think, was kind of into brewing as well. I think the dad worked in a pub for a little while as well, or owned a pub. But he gets into brewing, yes. Brewing, very legitimate industry. Lots of people would have done this. But Arthur Guinness does really, really well. He happens to get into brewing actually during an economic depression in Ireland, so property is very cheap. So he's, he's good at the old property speculation. And during this kind of dip in the market, he buys a few brewery sites around Dublin, including one huge site on the edge of the city called St. James's Gate.
This is in the 1750s, right?
This is in the 1750s, exactly, right. So right in the middle of the 18th century. It's called St. James's Gate, by the way, because it was the gate on the way to Santiago de Compostela, on the Camino de Santiago, yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. You have a lot of these gates, actually, in a lot of European cities will be called St. James's Gate in their own language because they lead to Spain. It's interesting. Anyway, so famously, he leased this site, this huge site, for 9,000 years at a rate of £45 per year.
Oh, wow. What's the story with like leases that are 9,000 years long? Like, leased from who? Like, who still exists in like 9,000 years? Like, why not just buy it and stuff?
Yeah. He leased it from the person who owned it. I'm like a private owner. I forget their name now, but they kind of hang around later on in the story of Guinness. It is odd. It's just a quirk, I think, of the kind of legal language of the time. You often see these leases of 4,000, 5,000 years, which effectively meant that you have it in perpetuity. But it's just the way that that's expressed. And listen, Guinness has been going for 250 years, so they're catching up on the lease, bit by bit.
Are they still paying the £45? I want to know.
Well, this is not clear. From what I can find out, it's not clear exactly actually what's going on with...
And to who? Like some immortal landlord?
Maybe they just handed over the capital at one point. I wasn't able to find that out actually, what exactly their proprietorship is at the moment.
We should say as well that this site at St. James's Gate is really, really big. It's huge. It's like a huge campus of breweries in the middle of the city. It's it encompasses multiple city blocks and pretty much dominates the whole western side of Dublin.
Yeah, it does. And it's also really well situated. It was right beside the newly built Grand Canal, which meant that it had a direct shipping route to Dublin Port, of course, for international exports. And you could also export all over Ireland because the canal went straight into the Midlands and connected all of the interior of Ireland as well. And if you look at an aerial view of St. James's Gate, you can actually see the shape of an old canal basin in the modern street plan right beside it. It's not there anymore, but you'll be able to spot it. It's kind of rounded on one end. And the street around it is still called Grand Canal Place, even though it's been filled in.
Right.
And the old connection actually to the where the canal is now is underneath the Lewis tram tracks. That's where the tram is built, around where Fatima stop is located today.
Okay. So from this huge brewery, Arthur Guinness starts selling a particular kind of ale, which is called stout or Irish stout, because there's an English style stout as well, which tastes quite different. Isn't that right?
Yes, there was an English stout. It's sometimes called milk stout, I think.
Okay.
It's sweet and a bit disgusting, honestly. Like, it's just not very nice. But Arthur Guinness decided to produce this other kind of stout, this very popular Irish stout, which is dry instead of sweet. And it was becoming really fashionable at the time that he opened this brewery. So he had his eye on the market straight away. And this is where Guinness benefited from another accident of history. So just as this new stout was becoming popular in Dublin, the American War of Independence breaks out. Remember, we're in the middle of the 18th century, and that had all of these major political consequences for Ireland, especially for Ireland's economy.
Right. Okay, so the American Revolution ended up becoming this key moment of leverage for the Anglo-Irish elite in Ireland because they very much saw themselves as being in a similar situation to the colonists in North America. So when the American colonies started to rebel, the Protestant Assembly in Ireland basically told Westminster, if you don't give us more stuff, we're going to rebel as well. We're going to do the same thing.
Yeah. And we did actually make an episode about this a few years ago, if you're interested in that moment. It's called Grattan and His Parliament, which you can look it up if you want to listen to it. But in a nutshell, these colonial elites in the Irish Parliament were fed up with being exploited by Westminster, just like the elites in the American colonies were. So they were very much in the same boat. And Ireland was really being exploited, by the way. Remember, Ireland was not a part of the UK at this point. It was effectively still an extraction colony. It had its own puppet government, but its economy mainly served to provide a counterweight to the British economy. So, for instance, when the wool industry started to decline in Britain in the early 18th century, the first thing that Westminster did was to ban wool imports from Ireland to Britain. And that made wool traders in Britain rich again. So it saved the wool industry in Britain, but it destroyed Ireland's wool industry, and the wool industry in Ireland was one of its primary industries. So it actually led to famines and stuff.
Oh, wow.
So, there's real kind of economic abuse of Ireland to maintain England in particular as a rich place. So beer production was very similar. It was similarly stymied to favour British producers. So in Ireland, Irish-produced beer was taxed about 5 times more heavily than English-produced beer, which meant that if you were buying a beer in Ireland, it was significantly cheaper to buy a beer that had been imported from England than beer that was produced just down the road from you, right? Wow. So Irish breweries had to struggle, basically, all the time to kind of keep up with English breweries, which were always making more money than them.
It's fascinating, isn't it? You've got to just keep the money flowing in one direction, like flowing over the Irish Sea towards England. So then we have the American Revolution breaking out, and the colonial ascendancy in Ireland, who were losing money themselves from this system, of course, started to make these threats of rebellion. And you even had American-style militias, I think, forming in Dublin. And this really worried Westminster because they were already losing their colonies in America, and the last thing they needed was to lose their Irish colony as well.
Yeah, exactly. So in the 1780s, Westminster start making major economic concessions to appease this Protestant ascendancy, to just shut them up, to get them out of their hair, because they have this American Revolutionary War going on. Of course, the Protestant ascendancy knew exactly what they were doing. And one of these concessions was to change those tax laws so that Irish beer could compete fairly with imported English beer. Now, so suddenly, Arthur Guinness has a major kind of opportunity. Not only does this mean that he can compete with English beer that's being sold in Ireland, because his beer is cheaper now for the first time.
Right.
It also means that for the first time, he can export his very, very, very popular Irish stout to England and compete with English breweries there as well.
Wow. Okay, so basically his potential market is just quadrupled, like overnight. And I understand he was also a supporter of Catholic emancipation.
Yeah, so like a lot of the Protestant ascendancy supported some measure anyway of repeal of the penal laws at this stage in the 1780s. And this was because even these people who were benefiting from the sectarian system had started to think that this system is doing more harm than it's doing good. It was also kind of past its prime. It was the 1780s now, and laws like this just didn't seem like they were at all reasonable anymore. However, now we have to keep this kind of in the frame of what would become unionism. Arthur Guinness was very much loyal to the British Crown, as were the majority of the Protestant ascendancy, including the people who were, harassing Westminster. So when the 1798 rebellion breaks out, he's not supporting that, for instance.
Right.
In fact, that's not the kind of politics that he's on here. In fact, some people of the time accused him of being an informer against the rebels, and there were a lot of attacks on the Guinness brewery after the 1798 rebellion by Republicans. But there isn't a ton of evidence he was actually an informer, but he was definitely very anti the Irish Republic. Okay,
interesting. He's a loyal guy. He's loyal to British rule.
Yes, and this remains the case right into the 20th century. The Guinness brewery and the Guinness family were loyal absolutely to Britain, which completely makes sense from their business perspective, especially when we think about Ireland being inducted into the United Kingdom in 1801. Most of the Protestant ascendancy would have been horrified by that. There was chaos, there was economic ruin. But for people like Guinness, that was perfect. For business people, that was absolutely brilliant, especially if they're making money from exporting to Britain. For them, it was a little bit like joining the EU or something, right? Open trade borders, basically, is the main thing that's happening in their perspective.
Yeah.
So not only do they have free access to the British market, but majorly for them, now that Ireland was part of the UK, they could export directly to other British colonies. Before this point, Ireland was not allowed to do trade with other colonies. So other colonies could do trade with Britain, but they couldn't do trade with each other, or certainly Ireland couldn't anyway. That was part of the kind of counterweight measure to make sure that all the good trade went to Britain. So now suddenly Ireland can, and Guinness starts exporting beer all over the world. This has a huge impact still today. Guinness is drunk all over the world today, especially in Africa and South Asia. Guinness is really, really popular in Nigeria, for instance, still today. Yeah. And from the moment that they get access to this market, they had started producing a new stout, which they called West India Porter. That was designed to go to the West Indies, as you can guess by the name. And it was designed actually with a higher alcohol content so that it would keep on the long journey across the sea. So we're talking about maybe 6 weeks, maybe 2 months across the sea to the West Indies.
Yeah.
So it was designed for export, basically, in its even composition. And that is still the Guinness that people in a lot of the world drink today. So if you go to Nigeria, for instance, the most popular brand of Guinness is Guinness Foreign Extra, which is a different Guinness than we drink in Europe. And it comes from this West India Porter.
It's fascinating. So we're looking at the advent of globalization, really. This is one of the first companies that's kind of in a position to become an international brand, an international product. And that's because of the British Empire. it's found itself within the British Empire and in a position to benefit benefit from that. And it's designing its products specifically for long sea voyages to take advantage.
Yeah. So this, I mean, that's one thing that's kind of skewed in the series. If you watch any of the series, one of the main plot points is kind of the internationalization of Guinness, like selling across the sea to America, for instance. No, that was happening since the very beginning. This was the reason that Guinness became successful, because of international export. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so let's get to the 19th century then. So we'll jump ahead a bit. And this is when Arthur's son, Benjamin Guinness, became the richest man in Ireland off the back of the business. And it's at this point that the Guinness family, who don't come from like a noble background, start buying up landed estates. So they start getting the trappings of aristocracy.
Yeah, they start like buying up tens and thousands of acres of land. And like you say, this is to try and approach, basically, to get closer to the gentry and the aristocracy. Now, this is another thing that the Netflix series does not portray at all. They portray the Guinnesses like this ancient kind of powerful family, but that is not how they were seen. They were new money. The Guinnesses were very much new money, and they were recent new money. I mean, they only start making their money in 1759, so it's only 2 generations after Arthur Guinness opens his brewery that they become the richest people in Ireland. So this is a really quite, catapult into the upper ranks.
It's much more like a rich American family or something at this period, and how they would have been seen. Like that's the kind of, that's all the history they have. Yeah, not going back very far.
Absolutely. Very like a rich American family, and actually very similar to a rich American family in the fact that they're Irish. They're not British, right? So they're coming from, the colonies, basically. And so they're looked down upon in the same way as in the very fact that they're not from, the motherland either, right? They're just kind of upstarts. They're upstarts culturally and financially. So all the way through the 19th century, you have a lot of snide things written about them as like grubby Irish brewers who had come into a bit of cash, basically.
Yeah.
So a lot of their actions during this period were geared towards breaking into the inner circles of the upper classes in Britain, and land ownership was a huge part of this. So there's a reason. So first of all, of course, all the old aristocratic dynasties were landowners. So if you want to be one of them, you got to have land as well. Usually you've had it for thousands of years, not tens of years, but whatever. You have to start somewhere, I suppose. Secondly, if you're a big landowner, and the more land you have, the better, you have more access to powerful positions in government, because basically you have a bigger sway on the national economy. People at this time owned whole counties and stuff. So stuff they did could actually affect the national economy. Wow. So there was an actual kind of national interest to get them into government, because they needed, their voice needed to be heard, right?
Right.
They're like a constituency in one person, basically. Also, the more land you have, the more you can influence policy. So you can, for instance, you can tell all your tenants to vote for you. That's something that people did, like tell all your tenants to vote for you, become elected more easily, or tell other landowners to vote for you, or whatever. And thirdly, owning huge amounts of land made it much easier if you wanted to get yourself a title. And the Guinnesses really wanted to get themselves a title, and you definitely needed to have land to do that. So in 1885, Benjamin's son, Edward, so we're on Arthur's grandson now. So Arthur's grandson, Edward, who is one of the characters in that series, actually. He gets himself the title of baronet, which is almost embarrassing, because like baronet is kind of like a title that you buy, basically. It's not really a real title. Interestingly, actually, the title of baronet was invented in order to finance the colonization of Ireland. Whoa. About a century earlier. Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
That is interesting. I had no idea.
Yeah. King James I, who was the king during the Ulster plantations, invented a new title. It's not a noble title, by the way. It's just a kind of something title. He invented a new title that he would sell to people who wanted to rise up in society. And then he would take the money and he invested that into the Ulster plantation. So it was made especially to finance the colonization of Ireland. Anyway.
A cash crop of something you could add to your name. But people wasn't really taking it seriously if you called yourself a baronet. Like everyone would know that you just bought it.
Yeah, I mean, like by this stage, you don't buy them anymore, but you get them fairly easily. And what happened was you got the title of baronet when you had been bugging the king, basically, or the queen for a noble title. And the king or the queen would say, okay, listen, just shut up for a minute. Here's the title of baronet. Go away for a few years and come back to me. Because they couldn't be handing out noble titles willy-nilly, because then the noble titles kind of lose all their value, right? So baronet is kind of a stopgap. You'll notice in like a lot of Jane Austen's novels, she often comes from families where the father is a baronet. And that's a joke because, you know, the whole thing about Jane Austen's novels is they're kind of like, they're gentry, but they're not at the top of the pile of gentry, you know, like by definition. And so baronet kind of means that.
Interesting.
Anyway, yes. So he gets this title of baronet.
A slightly embarrassing title of baronet, yeah.
The baronet. But they keep getting more land and they keep getting more political power. So basically, once that happens, the government, or I suppose the authorities in Britain, have to give you a noble title because they don't want the same thing happening that was happening in Ireland. They don't want the business people to get richer or more powerful than the aristocracy. So what happens is when business people get to that level, you have to give them a title. So it's okay, they're part of the aristocracy now. It's
otherwise the whole thing's falling apart. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, I mean it's all a big dance, right? So this is where he gets promoted first to Baron Ivy, so that's a real title, Baron, and then Viscount Ivy, which is quite high up, and I think he gets Earl Ivy eventually, but this happens quite late. We're talking the 1910s, I think, eventually.
Okay. And this gives context to why they're trying to make that whole Ivy thing happen, right? Thinking back to that old Gaelic seat of power in County Down, trying to link themselves with those ancient McAnguses or McGuinnesses and to reinvent themselves really as an ancient ruling family. I can imagine as well that in the time that we're talking about in the 19th century, that doesn't hurt as a Protestant family to have an ancient Irish Gaelic lineage either, because obviously you're operating in a context where that you're dealing with a Catholic majority which has, you know, national aspirations. So it probably doesn't hurt either for that. So the Ivy name, it's so interesting, like it goes hand in hand with the Guinnesses. So everything associated with the Guinness is called Ivy. So like their townhouse in Dublin is called Ivy House, and their charitable foundation is called the Ivy Trust. There's the Ivy Gardens in Dublin. They had an art collection called the Ivy Collection and so on. And they had loads of different houses. The most famous of them is Ashford Castle in Con, County Mayo, which the Guinnesses actually bought in 1855, right after the worst years of the Great Hunger. So I'm guessing the famine didn't affect them that badly.
Yeah, this is interesting. Like their rise to become the richest family in Ireland completely coincides with the famine. Like they did just fine during the famine, and that is because so much of the Guinness business was based on export.
Yeah.
So yeah, Ashford Castle, I suppose we could start there. If anyone has ever been there, it is this huge, sprawling monster of a thing. I mean, it's very beautiful, but it's completely extravagant and excessive. And, you know, as well as buying it, the Guinnesses built 2 huge new wings on it, you know, right after they bought it. And not only is this in the period, like directly 1 or 2 years after the worst years of the famine, but this is right in the dead center of the region that was worst hit by the famine. Like you couldn't go to somewhere that was worse hit by the famine than Ashford in South County Mayo. Like the countryside all around this mansion would have been a hellscape at this point when they were building their new rings. Like half the place was dead, the other half were wandering around the road because they had been evicted. You know, everyone else had left if they could. There were abandoned towns, pits. You know, huge pits full of dead bodies would have been very much present there around them. Beggars everywhere you looked. Like horror, actually horror. So like it's, for me anyway, it's hard to look at Ashford Castle as anything else but like a sinister place, you know, because extravagant buildings like this were the product of the same social and political system that had created the famine. You know, like this system, the system that allowed the Guinnesses to buy that in the worst years of the famine were the reason that the famine was happening. Yeah. So its position in this most devastated place ends up being like this kind of ghastly monument to like extreme inequality and I suppose exploitation of the poor, really.
It is awful. There's something which gives me such a similar feeling, which is in Paris Court. house out in Wicklow. It's really beautiful house with lovely gardens, which I have lovely memories of visiting as a child. But there is a plaque on it, which I'm just recalling this from memory, so I don't remember the exact wording, but I think it's 1847, and it recalls, you know, the restoration of the house and gardens, or the extension of it, or like how, you know, how it was done then. And it's just like 1847. You know, you guys were building this paradise of gardens and house in the year when the country around you was starving to death. You know what I mean? It's just, it just gives this sinister underlay. It's kind of impossible to just not to see it as you say, this monument to this sickening inequality, a deadly inequality indeed. Having said that, now, there is that side of it, but also the Guinness family are famous for really large-scale philanthropy in the city of Dublin. Like, there's a reason why we know the name Ivy, because it's on loads of things that are still like public and social services today, including social housing. They financed a huge renovation of St. Patrick's Cathedral. And they also funded the building of extensive new blocks of modern, affordable housing with facilities like public baths and market buildings to replace the slums in Dublin's old medieval core. And many of those projects are still standing. Most notably, we might think of the Ivy Trust blocks that are on St. Patrick's Park.
Yeah, they really do mark the city. And, you know, you would look at them because they're quite distinctive buildings, kind of this blood red brick kind of color, which stands out from the rest of the city. And this is all true. There was a lot of philanthropy, and listen, I don't want to crap all over the Guinnesses once again here, because they really were doing very good things for the poor. But I also have to push back on the way this wave of philanthropy has been presented once again recently in kind of reportage about the Guinness history as this kind of great unprompted act of kindness, you know, because the Guinnesses just loved the poor people of Dublin so very much that they just couldn't help themselves but do all these wonderful things for them. You know, that's very much how this history has been presented. And it's a very curated history. I mean, there's a big body of very curated history about the Guinnesses out there that's, you know, leaves quite a lot out. Now, I'm not denying that this was the case. I'm sure that the Guinnesses loved the poor people of Dublin, you know, as much as the next man. But that's not all. That's not all there is to it. Like, first of all, a big performative acts, and performative is the main word here, big performative acts of philanthropy like this were another typical way that business families tried to inveigle their way into the aristocracy. So that was part of their kind of move into the upper classes as well.
It was part of the strategy.
It's part of the strategy. They're always trying to shed this very tenacious, stereotypical image of them as like greedy, money-hungry shopkeepers, you know, who did good. And like philanthropy is a prime strategy to counter that in a very public way. It's also a way, you know, that is still used to kind of apologize for wealth or to purify yourself from wealth, to kind of purge the kind of negative associations that come with extreme wealth, you know. So billionaires are always doing philanthropy as well to try to make themselves, you know, I'm just...
Hospital wings and art galleries.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're kind of purifying yourself from the negative associations of disgusting wealth. To put it simply. So there's that, right? Another thing is that there's this, well, if you think about it, this paternalistic kind of like quote unquote improvement of the city is actually a very effective form of soft power. So when the Guinnesses were doing things like building public housing, building baths and stuff in the city for the poor of Dublin, it's deliberately similar to a landlord looking after his tenants. So again, we have this kind of edging closer to the aristocracy. And it has the same purpose. What you're doing when you're doing this is you're presenting yourself as a benevolent ruler. But all the while, you're reinforcing the idea that you are a ruler, right? You know, that you are the ones who are kind of giving the basic infrastructure to the people, like a king or like a lord. Like, these acts of philanthropy give you a huge social and political authority, not just for 1 year or two, but for generations and maybe hundreds of years. Because just like you said, Naomi, these philanthropic projects are not anonymous. To say the least, they are emblazoned with the word Ivy all over them. It's engraved in stone, usually. Even in St. Patrick's Cathedral, when they renovated that, they put in a whole new window that they called the Ivy window, right? You know, so that nobody looking at the cathedral can forget that they did this. They're not doing this, quietly and generously. These buildings effectively serve as permanent advertisements for the authority of the Guinness family and their business. And like I said, rich people still do this. They finance the building of a library and then they call it the Voorhees Library. Everyone who knows how powerful the Voorhees are. It's a way of asserting power in itself through this kind of performative or the feigned idea of just being such a good and giving person.
Yeah.
And there is a certain implication underneath all that if these people have the power to give, then they must have the power to take away. That is an implied thing here. What if the Guinnesses stop giving you social housing? What if the Guinnesses stop building your baths? What if they tear them down? What if they decide to take those down to, sell the land that they're on? It's power. This is an expression of power. Sorry, this is kind of my research area, so I am aware I'm ranting, but anyway,
no. I absolutely get everything you're saying there, and I can see how it fits into that construction of the system of our aristocracy. I also think, though, that we shouldn't underestimate the role that faith played in those days, because this would have been a time when religion was incredibly important and people deeply, deeply believed in their particular faith. And in Anglicanism, as well as in other strands of Christianity, there is, this belief of the role of good works, right? So good works are, actions and deeds that show charity, compassion, kindness, adherence to biblical principles, and so on. And that demonstrates that you're a good person, that you're going to go to heaven, and so on. So it is part of acting as a Christian. And
Absolutely.
part of what you should do and what you ought to do, if you're going to get up there in heaven and stuff. And people completely believed in these things. So
yes, absolutely, that is very true.
Yeah, as far back as buying indulgences and everything back, when it was Catholicism, this is something that would definitely have played into what they were doing, I think.
Absolutely. It absolutely did. Explicitly. It did play explicitly into this. A lot of this would have been discussed in purely religious terms, doing this for the good of God. Yeah. And also in the 1880s and 1890s, when this was happening, it was also fashionable. It was charity was fashionable. So this is a kind of era, if you think about literature from that era, kind of helping the poor children. You often have kind of children in rags that an aristocratic lady comes and helps, brings them to her parlour and feeds strawberries and stuff. That was the image that people wanted to present of themselves publicly because it was fashionable, especially for women. It was a big thing for women, charity. And one of the female characters, Anne Guinness, who's presented in that series, she really was a big charity worker. She founded a lot of kind of charity organizations and gave a lot of money away, which was a thing that society women did at that point as well. Yeah, completely tied in.
It's part of
religious side. Yeah,
it's an early stage of the evolution of what were later to become social norms in the 20th century, the idea that people should have access to healthcare and clean housing and sanitation and stuff like that. A lot of that started out with these kind of do-gooders, especially rich women, who both maybe were driven by faith, but also wished to be seen, as particularly pious and good. And
it's not all cynical. It's pioneering, like you say, because we have to remember we're kind of in the Industrial Revolution at this point, and societies like this have never existed before. You never had teeming cities full of poor people who had nowhere else to go. Before the cities were small, most people worked on the land. So we're only 2 generations into this kind of new industrial city scenario, and people didn't get that we're going to have to systematically deal with poverty in an urban area, so this is a kind of tentative steps, exactly like you say, towards something like a welfare state. But anyway,
that will come later. They were, of course, known on a similar topic. They were known for good working conditions for their workers.
Yes, they were. This was very notable at the time and right into the 20th century. So Guinness workers were paid higher than average wages than other factory workers or brewery workers. They also got loads of stuff like holiday leave. They got paid holiday leave. They got pension plans, things like that. And a lot of this was in place decades before anything like this was standard or even known in other industries. So it was absolutely recognized as one of the best places, if not the best place you could work in Dublin City. Yeah.
And of course, homes were provided for workers too. They were available for a reasonable rent.
Yes, yeah, indeed. You also got 2 pints of Guinness a day. For
2 a day?
For free.
During
Just
the day?
2 a day. You got. I don't know exactly when you got it. Maybe you could choose the time you got it. But it was seen. Guinness was seen as a thing that you drank to improve your strength. This was an idea of it. But it's very calorific. It's. I mean, I actually don't know how many calories are in it. But what I mean is that it's full of carbohydrates, and drinking a big pint of malt can keep you going if you're working on a cold day, I suppose, like up on beams or wherever you are in the brewery.
Yeah.
But there's more to this. As far as I understand it, the 2 pints of Guinness thing is to kind of keep them in the orbit of the factory. Because one of the big issues with industrial workers at this point in Dublin was alcoholism. And what a lot of the other factories did around the city, especially down around the docks, is that they would actually literally pay their workers in beer. They would put the money like behind the bar, and the workers at the end of the day would go to the bar and drink. Yeah. Or they would say, you're only allowed to drink in this particular bar, and you're only here is your money good. And what they were trying to do was to make them into alcoholics. I mean, it was awful. Terrible. To make them dependent, basically, on their wages, so that they could pay them less and less and less and less money. But the workers would become more and more desperate to get more money, basically, to keep this going. So that was something that happened all the time. That was something that was very much behind the temperance movement. That's something we've never really talked about on the podcast. But there was a big temperance movement around the time of the independence movement. There's a bridge, I forget his name, that temperance guy. There's a bridge in Dublin named after one of the famous temperance guys. But temperance wasn't just about trying to get people off alcoholism. It was about the stopping exploitation through alcoholism through industries as well, which is interesting. Anyway.
That is fascinating. It's part of the company store thing, which you have those... There's like a famous song about that, like a folk song in the US. Like basically it's like a monopolistic institution that funnels the wages of the worker back into the company again, and you end up in debt to them. So you're pretty much just like in indentured servitude then, because you're not getting paid enough. But anyway, that's very sinister also when you think about it, having that with alcohol, with an addictive substance, that adds an extra sinister layer.
Absolutely, yeah. So as far as I understand it, these 2 pints of Guinness a day were to try and keep the workers out of pubs and to say, you get your Guinness here, but you get 2 of them. I mean, we don't want you drunk, like,
just like buzzing slightly.
Yeah. Exactly. This is quite enough. Like, this is quite enough. Thank you very much. So anyway, there's more to this, of course. It's not necessarily completely selfless either. This is smart business, what they're doing here. Giving their workers higher wages, giving them paid holiday leaves, things like this. Everyone understands now that, rested, happy workers are going to be more productive than stressed, tired workers. They realize this quite early. They're going to have more productive workers if the workers are happy. But also, if they get good workers, those workers aren't going to leave them, because this is the best gig in town. So they don't have any kind of, swapping out of workers. They don't have to hire people, which is very expensive. Of course, hiring people is expensive, and training people is expensive. So they're saving money on hiring and training people. They're keeping people basically their whole lives. And the money that they put into pension plans and things like that is actually very well invested when you think about it in the terms of the money that they're saving in the long run. So, this gets returns. So once again, kind of quite pioneering for how some factories, I mean, listen, I've been in plenty of workplaces who haven't got that whole happy worker, productive worker message yet. But but anyway, it also prevents your workers from unionizing and striking, because they have no reason to. They couldn't be happier. So you save money again by, not having strikes, basically. Anyway.
And that reputation of Guinness as a good employer is something that stretches right up until the current day, I think. Like, you definitely hear people who would have grown up in families where someone was working for Guinness, and like, I think that's very enduring. Yeah, that reputation.
This is also part of it. You end up with people who are kind of Guinness loyalists all over the city. All of your workers and all of their families are going to be saying, those Guinnesses, good people. They looked after me. They looked after my uncle.
You gotta hand it to them.
Gotta hand it to them. Yeah, exactly. And this is pretty good when it comes to things like elections, for instance. Or if your company is involved in some kind of scandal and you need, public support or something. It's a great, people are going to defend you to the teeth. Yeah. Now, There are some more unsavory aspects of the employment practices. Guinness was notorious for mainly employing Protestants. Now, they didn't just employ Protestants. You see that written sometimes. That's fairly common to see that written, that Guinness only employed Protestants. That's not true. They did employ Catholics, but more or less in the higher echelons of the company, so managers and foremen and things like that, they were pretty much all Protestant. So all the good jobs basically went to Protestants, which is completely like the status quo of pre-independence Ireland. You had Protestant companies and Catholic companies, and this is how Protestant companies they were sectarian, and so were the Catholic companies at the same time. But it very much would have been thought about as a Protestant company, a Protestant institution, and that played into the sectarian inequalities of the city in quite an ugly way, especially when you think about those privileged conditions of the workers.
Yeah, and it was also like, it was a symbol of unionism as well, right into the 20th century, which, isn't it curious that you do have these big Irish symbols that endure post-independence, and they managed to shed that unionist baggage, not least my own newspaper, the Irish Times, which used to be unionist and is now like definitely not unionist. But it's like, along with Guinness, it's managed to evolve with the times. Okay, so let's get into the 20th century then. That's when Guinness really sort of crystallizes itself as this brand that we recognize today. The beer changed. Guinness started putting nitrogen into the beer during the brewing process, and that made it more creamy, and it gave us this iconic white head, creamy head, that's now one of its trademarks. And it dived into one of the most, we must say, impressive marketing campaigns of almost any alcoholic drink. It's so ubiquitous that it's almost part of the Irish countryside at this point. Let's go through some of these ads, Tim. The Guinness signs.
The Guinness signs. I mean, the Guinness signs, actually, when I was looking up some of the iconic Guinness signs that we could discuss, and a flash came into my mind of one of them, which I think is on the wall of Joey and Chandler's apartment in Friends.
No way.
I think they have a Guinness poster up on their wall. I think so. I just kind of had a flash of that in my mind. And that just gives you an idea of like just how iconic these posters became. Like, can you think of having an ad for an alcoholic beer on your wall in like any other way? I mean, the only thing I can compare it to is maybe like vermouth from an ad for vermouth in the south of France in the 1920s that happens to be quite nicely produced, something a little bit classy, or something like that. I don't know, but the idea of putting up a Heineken ad on the wall or something, it just seems like absurd and weird, And these Guinness ads, some of the most iconic ones are from the 1930s, but they're still being used today. Like, you will still see them up today, and they're still functioning as advertisements. Now, maybe you can describe some of these, Naomi, because listeners definitely know the ones we're talking about.
Yeah, so I think some of the more iconic ones, they're drawn by an advertiser, someone who made advertising posters, called John Gilroy. He was working basically through most of the 20th century, and he would have been behind ones like My Goodness, My Guinness, which shows like a seal balancing a pint on its nose, and they'd often be shown with animals. Or you'd have the toucan, this toucan would be flying, carrying Guinness things, like Guinness pints. Many of them associate Guinness with nutritional value or building strength. So there's a worker who's like carrying a huge construction beam, like an iron beam or steel beam, just on his shoulder, as on his head. And simply the slogan "Guinness is good for you" is another one.
Guinness for strength is another one that was
Guinness
used
for strength,
a lot.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think part of what they're getting to this here is like Guinness contains a very small amount of iron. Now, it's not very much iron, but I think much was made of this little amount of iron that it contained. And also, like, being a kind of dense drink, you can easily believe that it contains a lot of nutritional value. This is pretty much disproven nowadays. They don't advertise it in this way anymore for a good reason. But it used to be recommended for like pregnant women, for example, to drink because of this much was made of this iron content. And this was a completely enduring impression that people had of Guinness. So much so that my dad, for example, when my dad remains a diminutive man. When he was small, when he was a boy, he was particularly small. Okay, he was small. And when he used to visit his cousins in the countryside, they used to give him Guinness. When he was like 6 or 7, they used to feed him Guinness because they thought it would help him grow. They thought it was like a way of feeding him up.
The wonderful child rearing practices of mid-20th century Ireland there in a nutshell. But yeah, no, this was definitely an idea. And it was a kind of an idea, even though everyone knew it wasn't true, it was an idea that kind of hung around in the popular imagination well after that. Those signs are still up. So, I mean, obviously for most alcoholic brands, having signs up that say, Heineken is good for you or something or what have you isn't going to get past the censors usually, who are going to be allowing standard advertising on the streets. But these ads, of course, are listed, I would guess, I suppose, because like they're almost 100 years old now, some of them. And some of the original ones are just hanging on the walls here. So, I mean, everyone understands that this comes from another time. Like, they're very much kind of relics of the past. But what an impact for that advertising campaign to have. No more than the harp that we were talking about, like this brilliant edition of Brian Boru's harp in, I think it was the 1860s or 70s when that was added. Yeah. Marketing has been at the core of Guinness, like, all the way through this kind of success story. Yes. So the harp was there. I think they put the harp on when they started exporting to England to try and give it a character, to kind of give it a character as an Irish beer. Like that was the idea, basically. Like this is an Irish beer. It gives it a personality, basically, to make it Irish. Yes. It makes it stand out from the crowd. But then we have this wave of advertisement in the 1930s, 1940s. And then later on in the 20th century, we have some of the most iconic television advertisements, I think, that I've ever seen anyway. Mm-hmm. Do you remember the one with the horses, Naomi?
I don't remember one of the horses. Wait, hold on. Is it kind of horses running in waves? And it's likening that to the settling of the head of the Guinness.
That's exactly what it is. Yes. Yeah. So I looked it up earlier in preparation for this episode to rewatch it again. And first of all, it's like a minute and a half long. So television advertisements in Ireland were generally 3 minutes long. I don't know what they are now, but when I was a kid, they were almost exactly 3 minutes long. So most ads were about 20, 30 seconds long. You'd have about 4 or 5 of them in there. Mm-hmm. This would have taken up an entire half of an ad, if not an entire ad. And it is like a film. I mean, and I was glued to my seat watching it again. I mean, listen, I don't want to do any more advertising for Guinness than we're already doing by making this episode, but I would urge you, listeners, to go and watch this ad. If you can, just type in Guinness ad horses. You'll find it straight away. And it's basically, exactly. It's a scene of surfers who are coming out of the waves, and the waves slowly turn into these magnificent white horses. And it is absolutely incredible. But the amount of money, not just the amount of money, but the investment in artistic directors, the investment in the conception of that ad is just really like flabbergasting today, especially when we put this back in the 1990s.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you remember The Dancing Man, Naomi.
I'm not sure about that one. I remember It's Guinness Time. Remember that?
What was that? I don't remember that one.
I don't exactly remember the details, but it associates the image of the clock, and just it tells you almost any time you're going to look at your clock, you're like, is it Guinness time? It's very direct. Like, remind people to drink Guinness kind of thing. And there were loads of clocks that said Guinness time on them. And there's still some of them around, clocks outside pubs and stuff that say Guinness time. It's actually really sinister now that I keep repeating it. Guinness time.
Listen, a lot of this is sinister.
Tell me, what was The Dancing Man?
The Dancing Man, you might remember when I sang the song, it was the same shtick again. It was playing on time. So the horses were playing on kind of like the settling waves of the Guinness in the Guinness glass.
It's just part of the might of Mother Nature, Yeah,
exactly. The man is a kind of, I suppose, an interpretive dance of the feeling that one has when one is waiting for a pint of Guinness to settle for the second pour. Okay. And he dances around in a bare studio. There's just more or less a blank wall behind him. And the song goes...
Oh,
yeah, you know it. I'm just impressed that, I mean, this happened 20 years ago, I think. That song is right on the tip of my tongue when I think about that ad. People used to sing it. Kids in the schoolyard used to sing it and do the dance in imitation of the man. Like, it became a meme, I suppose.
It was a big cultural phenomenon. Yeah, it was a meme. Yeah.
So, I mean, something so simple. You can imagine the amount of research that went into this. They were like, we're going to have kids dancing in the schoolyard to this. And they did.
They did.
Like,
so we can say, like, suffice to say, like, they're enormously successful with marketing, and a huge part of it as well is their connection with sports, you know, kind of almost overwhelming sports branding, and associating with particular events and series and stuff like that. So yeah, that's definitely part of their success. We keep mentioning there's 2-part pour as well, like the fact that you fill the glass, like, what is it, like 70% of the way up or so, and then you stop and you let it settle, and then you top it up, and that's like the correct way of pouring the Guinness, and it has to be done that way, and it's not right if it's not done that way. And that's like the idea that, like, it has to be done a certain way and the Guinness can be poured well or badly is part of its like I don't know, the whole cultural conception of Guinness, and like the reputation of, like, some pubs don't do good Guinness and other pubs do good Guinness and so on, and the taps have to be inspected and cleaned and all kind of this stuff. It's all wrapped up in it.
Yeah, actually, as I was researching for this episode, it occurred to me, it's like, I wonder, is that all marketing, actually? I wonder, is all of that marketing?
Yeah.
Because, like, when I realized that all of these ads play on the fact that you have to wait, like, this is the theme, it occurred to me that every time that you get a pint of Guinness in a pub, you are forced to kind of look at it for about a minute and a half, waiting for you, and kind of it creates a moment of kind of nervousness because the guy behind the bar has gone and served somebody else, and it's like, oh, I'm never going to get my own bloody drink now, and you know, this kind of thing. And you have like 6 of them in a row who are all waiting, because between each pour, listeners who don't drink Guinness, between each pour you need to wait, I think it's 89 seconds or some kind of like gimmicky kind of amount of seconds that they say that it has to stay, but about a minute and a half or 2 minutes. And during that time, that's like advertising. It's almost like a kind of advertising space for the pint of Guinness itself. It is marketing the Guinness. Also, this, I mean,
time
listen,
owned by Guinness. Guinness time, yeah.
Guinness time. The tap inspection things, well, sorry, I mean, I want to talk about more of this stuff. There's other stuff that kind of comes around Guinness. Splitting the G is a new one. Now, have you heard about this?
I've heard about it. Yeah, I haven't actually seen it, but I've just heard it like secondhand. It's like a meme, right, on TikTok, where you have to drink a certain amount of your drink so that it comes exactly in the middle of the G or something like that on the glass.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. It's a kind of it's not of our time. It's for people younger than us, I think, Naomi. Yeah. But it's a kind of new trend that has become associated with Guinness as if it was an ancient trend. I mean, people talk about it as like, oh, this has always been the way, but it didn't exist like 2 years ago. No. And the idea is that you have a Guinness glass, and of course on the Guinness glass it says the word Guinness, and that you drink exactly the amount of Guinness in your first gulp, so that the top of the Guinness falls halfway across the G of the word Guinness. Yeah. Now, of course, this wouldn't have been a thing in our time because Guinness was just served in any old glass. Like, you rarely got Guinness in a glass that had Guinness written on it.
Just had Guinness on it, yeah.
And if you did, like, it was all worn away from having been washed a million times.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
So nobody was splitting any bloody G's like before 2020. But this, I looked this up as well. Apparently the company has nothing to do with this. Apparently the company didn't do this, but it took off by itself. So it just shows like the kind of marketing kind of animal that Guinness is, that it's almost driving itself now. It's autonomous. It's, you know, it's learned how to open doors, Naomi. Yeah.
It's just, it's that level of iconic status. Yeah. Imagine having a meme, a takeoff meme about you. You didn't even start, which always requires someone to buy a fucking pint of your drink. Can you imagine?
Having celebrities doing it on TikTok, like, just okay, great. Like, I suppose you'll take it. Yeah, I suppose they're pretty thrilled about it. I have heard now, I have a friend who works she's an engineer in breweries in the UK. Okay. And she told me that there has been a huge push in recent years to advertise Guinness in the UK and internationally. That it's got very, very aggressive. Now, apparently, Guinness had nothing to do with that Netflix series either. So they had nothing to do with splitting the G. They had nothing to do with the Netflix series. But all of this seems to be happening, quite intensely.
How fortuitous that it happened to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually seriously not implying that they did have anything to do with it. Yeah. But I think it's kind of the ball is rolling with or without them, I suppose. Probably because of this intense advertising that they're also doing at the same time. And when I was in London there recently, everyone was abuzz with a quote-unquote Guinness shortage. And there was such a Guinness shortage, quote-unquote, that in pubs you could only get 1 pint of Guinness per person. Mm. So, of course, you can guess what every single person in the pub did.
What?
They all got a bloody pint of Guinness, and people in London, they do now, but they didn't drink Guinness that much. 3 people having 6 pints of Guinness probably was a drop in the ocean compared to everyone who came into that pub having 1 pint of Guinness. So I was like, this is definitely not in shortage, actually, guys. I feel like this is the oldest trick in the book, to say that something is in shortage to get people to panic buy, basically, which is what people were doing. And Guinness has taken off hugely in England in a way that it hadn't before.
That's so interesting because, when I used to live in London, you had to go to a special pub to get a Guinness. I think you could get it in other ones, but it was not a commonly ordered drink. And so, at least part of my family lore about Guinness is you have to get it from somewhere that serves Guinness regularly, because otherwise the inside of the taps will be full of stale Guinness. It won't taste good. So we used to have to go to the specific Irish pub, which pretty much all the Irish people I knew in London went and knew of as the place to get your Guinness.
Yes, I know. Is it the Toucan? I think it must be.
Been there. I think that is what it's called.
In Soho, I think.
Called the Toucan, which is the Guinness symbol. It's Guinness symbol. Yeah.
Yeah. That was the only place you could get a good Guinness. And I've been often with Irish people.
Yeah. We've been actually, I remember. We went with a mutual friend. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure we have. Yeah. You could get Guinness elsewhere. I mean, there's all those Irish pubs, but it was terrible. It was just awful. It was undrinkable, Guinness. Now, there is reasons for this. Now, there is this issue of the pipes. So to make Guinness taste quite nice, or to make Guinness taste like it should taste, the taps need to be kept impeccably, really impeccably. Now, this is something that pubs do not do for other beer. It's actually really, really shocking when you kind of look into how pipes are kept with beer in most pubs that you go to. Again, this engineer friend of mine told me that, sometimes when you have a beer that you just have one and then you wake up with a terrible hangover. Yeah. This happens every now and again. She said that's because the beer has gone off. It's basically poisoned you. And that they have kept that beer for years after its sell-by date. And it's basically given you a slight case of poisoning, basically. That pubs do this all the time. It's just, most beer you drink is disgusting. The pipes are moldy, they're filthy, there's cockroaches down there and stuff, awful stuff. Anyway. Yeah. Guinness will not have that usually. In Ireland, Guinness roams around the country with a little van, making sure that the pipes are squeaky clean. And that's one of the reasons that Guinness tastes very good there. But also, I have discovered it's because of water. It's because the water that is used in the Guinness has a huge chemical effect on how it tastes.
Okay.
So that Guinness, and not just Guinness, but a lot of other beers don't export well. Because what happens is they export the raw materials, and then the raw materials are actually brewed with water on site in the country that they're exported to.
Yeah.
So that the beer that you drink has actually gone through a different chemical process than the beer that you would get at home. Right. So I know that this is the case with Guinness. I think in the UK they do export raw material, or they used to export raw materials, and that there is a possibility that the water actually that is being used in the UK makes the Guinness taste different than you're used to. This
is exactly what Italians say about pizza. They're like, yeah, you can export the flour, but then it gets mixed with the local water and it's not right, and that's why the pizzas are not as good as they are in Naples. They say the same thing.
I think pizza is probably the only other kind of product you could almost compare to Guinness, actually, when you're talking about things like this. Anyway, as a national symbol. Anyway, so apparently pubs have come up with, or breweries have come up with a way to change the water. They've come up with a way to chemically change the water to match the water in the country that it is supposed to be produced in, usually. So that's why Guinness has started to taste better recently in other countries, apparently.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Okay.
I want to mention, we're talking about Guinness. What is actually Guinness? Yeah. It's owned by this massive, huge drinks giant called Diageo, which is actually headquartered in London. It's technically a British multinational. So it's the result of the merger of two companies, one of which was the Guinness Brewery, and the other was Grand Metropolitan PLC, which was a huge like conglomerate based in England. So the two of them merged together and formed this thing called Diageo in 1997. And Diageo owns Guinness plus loads of brands. So it owns like Bailey's, it owns like loads of other beers like Kilkenny, Harp, loads of these Smithwicks, Hop House 13, all this kind of stuff, but loads of whiskey as well, including loads of Scottish whiskies, and Irish whiskey as well. So yeah, it's whenever we're talking about this is actually like a traded company, you know. So it's I think the Guinness family maintain like a large stake, but it is very much a modern like phenomenon, I suppose. It's like a traded public company.
Yeah, and very far away from the cozy pub image, like a big international monster on the economic stage. Yeah.
And something interesting happened a few years ago. There was a sort of a brewing renaissance in Ireland where you got a lot. Basically, people didn't start breweries for like 100 years because I don't know why, but there wasn't the market, or you know, there wasn't economic motive. But then this sort of craft beer phenomenon happened, and suddenly loads of new breweries started up, and distilleries as well. Loads of new distilleries. There was a renewal about 10 years ago, I would say, and it happened in Ireland, it happened in other places as well. And suddenly you had this kind of new rivalry where people were saying, oh, you know, Guinness, oh, it's associated with Ireland, but that's actually like a big multinational company. So support your actual local craft beer, which is, you know, brewed by a small brewery. And it was a big thing, and people started drinking a lot of craft beer. So of course, what Guinness does, or Diageo does, is as soon as they see something like that emerging in the market, they come up with their own versions. So they came up with like their own little like sub brands, which are branded as craft, which I think Hop House 13 is one of them. And then the same thing happened as well with, you know, one of the things that the trends that's affected it lately is that younger people are drinking less. There's been like a number of phenomena, like it is quite expensive to go out, but also people are like quite focused on health and stuff, and going to the gym and things. So younger people statistically are drinking less, and they've come out with Guinness Zero, which is a zero alcohol Guinness. So yeah, they're meeting that. So the brand sort of evolves according to the trends of the time and of the moment.
Yeah, they're constantly coming out with new stuff. Actually, this is very evident. It might be a moment a little bit late, actually, in the episode, since we have said the word Guinness each approximately 700 times, much like that corridor at the end of the Guinness store.
Sorry, listeners, for subjecting you to the corridor.
Welcome to the corridor. I'm going to end that corridor with actually mentioning that there are other Irish stouts available. Good Irish stouts.
Yeah.
So if you go to Cork, famously, Murphy's is a really, really popular Irish stout, and you will get people ordering Murphy's, you know, in quite prodigious quantities in pubs. And a lot of the creamy white heads that you'll see on drinks are from pints of Murphy's as well, or Beamish as well.
Beamish
is another
looks
Irish
just
stout.
like Guinness. Yeah, has the white head. When I worked in pubs doing promotions, actually for Diageo, I remember I came across a guy and he used to order Beamish in a Guinness glass, right? So he wanted Beamish, but he wanted to be given to him in a Guinness glass, and the reason was Beamish was cheaper. So he didn't want the social opprobrium of buying the cheaper drink. He wanted the image of drinking Guinness, but he was actually drinking Beamish. I thought that was really interesting. Always stuck with me.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I mean, you might find people doing the reverse in Cork, because Murphy's has a kind of Cork reputation, and people in Cork are very proud to drink Murphy's rather than Dublin Guinness.
Yeah.
As far as I understand, now I'm not a connoisseur of stout by any means, but as far as I understand, Guinness is often seen by people who are into stout as kind of entry level. And that the brewed ones, including Murphy's and Beamish, actually are considered kind of more real. That if you're interested in kind of tasting stout, that they're more interesting. But
they have got
couldn't
more
tell you that for
toasted
sure.
flavor, more like complex, challenging flavor. Yeah, okay, I can see that. Yeah.
I don't know. It's been a long time since now I had a chance to compare Beamish and Murphy's and Guinness, so I couldn't verify that at all.
Yeah.
But something that we also have to say is, like, there is a problem here. There's actually a problem that it's not Guinness's fault necessarily, of having an alcoholic drink be so closely linked with the marketing of the country on an international stage. So, I mean, of course, we already have kind of stereotypes of the Irish as drunks and alcoholics, and stereotypes of St. Patrick's Day linked with beer and stuff. Now, when you have kind of, let's say, the tourist board using images of people in a pub with Guinness as a way to kind of define what Irishness is, this is an issue, surely. I mean, there's something that's not ideal, really, that other countries maybe might think twice about.
Yeah, well, there's a reason why they had to start adding provisos to alcohol advertising and say, you know, enjoy Guinness responsibly, because they need to try and make sure something, you know, back in the day they used to claim that it had iron and advertised to pregnant women and all that kind of thing. And over time, there's more of a recognition of the fact that this is a highly addictive substance, and there is a certain percentage of the population which is really susceptible to addiction. And alcoholism in particular, it seems to have a genetic element, or at least an inheritable element, whether that's transferred socially or whatever. And it's a massive, I mean, it's a huge problem. It destroys people's lives, just on an individual basis. You know, how many people have struggled with broken families and difficult childhoods, and like the incredible toll, not to mention like the health impacts, you know. There's a huge fight lately because the Irish government wanted to put warnings on alcohol bottles saying that alcohol causes cancer, which is just true. I mean, if you just look at the scientific evidence, it is true, okay? Drinking alcohol is absolutely associated in particular with certain cancers like breast cancer, but also others. And they want to put, you know, alcohol labels stating that, so that people are informed in the same way as you have on cigarette boxes. And the strength, the potency of the lobbying against that was intense, you know. And part of that is because the alcohol industry, which includes publicans as well as the sort of the big brewery brands that are selling the stuff, they do not want to become what they call, you know, a stigmatized industry or a vice industry, like what happened basically to tobacco companies. There was a time when tobacco would have been advertised in just the same way, in a kind of a feel-good way. We can remember the Marlboro Man. They were also geniuses at advertising. And now it's a very different scene, because you have those warnings on the boxes which say, you know, smoking cigarettes causes lung cancer, which we all know is absolutely true. But there's huge lobbying in the alcohol industry against the same thing happening to them. They don't want to become stigmatized in the same way and associated with the disease, even if it's true, okay? It is true. And Ireland is one of the countries that suffers with, in particular, with alcoholism, which is a really horrible thing that destroys people's lives. And definitely, you know, if you have any personal experience of knowing friends or family who are struggling with alcoholism, it does add an absolutely bitter note when you see the feel-good advertising, because that really plays into all the kind of ways that people who are drinking too much use to kind of justify their own drinking. You know, that it's just harmless fun, or it's part of the culture, or, you know, it's something that's acceptable or non-negotiable in some way. And of course, like just like the gambling industry, the industries, even if they put their little disclaimers, or they put money towards, you know, whatever alcoholism charity there might be, they're still benefiting from the euros that are being put into their pockets by people who have a disease, who have an addiction. So there's an absolute dark side to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this association then with Irishness, of course, is with the fact that Irishness is used in that marketing is, it can leave a little bit of a bitter taste, so to speak. I mean, sorry about that, listener. Like, you know, Naomi, so often when, let's say you're in a foreign country and somebody comes up to you, they hear you speaking English, they say, where are you from? And you say you're from Ireland, and they will just say the word Guinness to you.
Or they'll even do a cheers. They'll do a cheers, you know, with their hand, as though they have a glass. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Indeed. Yeah. And that, you know, that kind of thing makes you think as well, when you think about the Guinness Storehouse being the number one attraction in Ireland for tourists, is that because that's the only thing that they know about Ireland on coming to the country, or the most prominent thing they know? They just think of the word Guinness, and they go to Dublin. It's like, well, you know, in Ireland you have to do Guinness, you know, like without actually thinking about anything else, because that is so dominant in the image of the country. I mean, it's not great, and it's not great that it's tied to a big international conglomerate either.
Of course. It would be nicer if some of those euros were coming in and they were going towards, like more like unambiguously positive local stuff, like I don't know, the learning of traditional music and dance, or this kind of thing.
Right.
Like if only a tiny bit of that money came towards funding kind of stuff, what a positive impact that would have. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was something that literally wasn't a giant ad.
It wasn't a giant ad, yeah. Or like, I don't know, if there was some way of coming and appreciating like the literary tradition or something, like, wouldn't that be awesome? But anyway. Yeah.
Well, I mean, a lot of this is down to insufficient funding for culture and the arts, basically, in Dublin City. I mean, there's a surprisingly little amount of things to do in Dublin, actually, compared to what it could offer tourists. But yeah, I mean, that's a whole other conversation. But I think no matter what we feel about that, it's like I said, this animal has taken off by itself. Like there's no kind of putting that white horse back in the cage. It's out there now. Sorry, but my metaphors and are out of control. But it's a hugely interesting phenomenon to look at. Listen, we better wrap up, Naomi.
We better wrap up. We've been rambling on. So we have more stuff now for the half pint. We are going to go and chat about the series. We watched some of it. We're going to give our views on the House of Guinness on Netflix, and maybe a few more reflections on the making of the episode and the history behind it. So do join us there for Patreon supporters over on patreon.com/The Irish Passport.
Yes, indeed. And if you have not signed up yet, you can go and find more than 100 episodes over there on Patreon, episodes of extra content, and you will be supporting the continued making of the podcast as you do it. All right. That's a song from me.
I suppose we say now. Sláinte.
Yeah, we better say sláinte this time. Bye.
Bye.